As the title of this session suggests, we're going to talk about Cali lessons, but we're going to take a slightly different approach from what you're probably used to hearing. I'm sure that all of you have been corralled, or maybe most of you have been corralled by somebody from Cali at some point and told how your students can benefit from using Cali lessons. But we're not going to talk about how using Cali lessons can improve your class. What we're going to talk about is how authoring Cali lessons can help not your students, but you, and particularly your teaching. Three of us on today's panel. I'm Steve Bradford. I'm from the University of Nebraska. Mary LaFrance is the Associate Dean of Academic Affairs and a professor at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And Robert Lynn is a professor at Southwestern University. The way we're going to do it is I'm going to go first. Mary and Robert are going to jump in at times as they want to, and then at the end, Mary and Robert will do some additional discussion, try to wake up those of you that have fallen asleep while I've been talking. Let me start by asking, kind of get a sense of what the audience is. How many of you have never written a Cali lesson? How many of you have written at least one? Okay, well, good. We were somewhat worried at this conference about preaching to the choir. You're more likely to find people here who have written, but I hope for those of you who haven't written that we can at least convince you to give it a try. For those of you who have written a lesson, if nothing else, this presentation will give you something to take back to your the other faculty members at your school and try and convince them to write some Cali lessons or at least use them. Now, I have to admit I'm a bit of a late convert to Cali. I'm not one of those computer people that has been in it since it started, whenever it started. My first attempt to write Cali lessons came 2 years ago, about 2 years, 2.5 years ago, when I got a fellowship in the business organizations area and started writing lessons for that. I've now written, I think, 13 and a half, if you count the one that I may never finish. I didn't mean that, Deb. I am going to finish it. And when I started writing Cali lessons, improving my teaching really wasn't one of my goals, and I really didn't expect it to have any effect on my teaching. But it's been a really nice byproduct of that, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. Now, one of the ways that writing Cali lessons at least has benefited me was with respect to coverage of my classes. I know one of the main problems, obviously, that everybody has in teaching a course is deciding what you're going to include, what you're going to leave out. Seldom do we have a class where we've got enough time to cover everything we would like to cover. And obviously, you're going to be doing that with Cali lessons as well. In writing a Cali lesson, you have to ask yourself what you're going to include, what you're going to leave out. But one thing that's different about Cali lessons is that in doing that, you can't just take your own preferences into account. You have to take account of other people's preferences. What are they doing in their classes? Because their students are going to be using the lessons, and to the extent they cover stuff that you don't cover, their students are going to expect to be able to see that on the lessons. And in doing that, you kind of start thinking about, well, why is it that they include this subject that I don't include? Why is it that they don't include something that I consider very important? And that starts making you think about your own preferences. And if you're like me, that's a really good thing, because once I've made coverage decisions, inertia tends to sort of set in. And I don't tend to do a lot of additional evaluation from year to year unless something new comes up. And the coverage process that you go through in writing a Cali lesson forces you to overcome that inertia. You've got to look at these things again. And doing that for purpose of the Cali lesson feeds back and helps you in terms of the class as well. The other thing about a Cali lesson is that it gives you a very rigorous, systematic view of coverage. Because with respect to a Cali lesson, if you leave something out that needs to be there, it's going to be painfully obvious by the end of the lesson. You get a better sense of how different topics play off of each other, and how one thing feeds into another thing and is needed for another subject. Much more than you would, say, over several class periods where you've got a lot of other concerns and you're not really focusing on that issue. Doing it for Cali, I mean, that is what you're focusing on. And you can evaluate coverage in a really systematic way. And then in addition, we talked about taking other people's preferences into account. When you write Cali lessons, Cali has a very good review system where you're running that lesson through different people that may or may not have some expertise in the area. And so you're getting their input as to, well, why didn't you include X? Why did you include this? This doesn't look like it's something that's important enough to be in this topic. And that's very beneficial. And again, it forces you to reevaluate your own thoughts about what things ought to be included in a way that you wouldn't if you didn't have that feedback, if you didn't have to justify it to somebody else. So one of the things that Cali lessons helped me with was with respect to those kinds of coverage decisions.
Well, I think one of the things that Mary and I can bring, and Steve had been involved as well, is with the fellowships, and where you're not working just by yourself, but you're working with a group of other folks that are experts in the field. And a couple of things on the coverage notion. It's helpful to have for the law professors that have dealt with this subject and have spent years in the classroom dealing with it, and so they can help you to determine what the coverage should be, what they do compared to what you've done. It also helps with the reviewing situation. I received one review where some suggestions were made, one in particular, as to one particular topic that I should include in my lesson, and I had never covered that in class. And so I'm thinking, well, either I'm way off base, or this is a particular topic that this particular reviewer thought was interesting. And so I simply checked with the other fellows and said, here's the issue. Do you cover that in class? And the consensus was either I don't really know what it is, or I certainly haven't dealt with that in that kind of depth, and so decided not to go that route. The other approach, or thing to keep in mind with the fellowship, is Deb Quintal, who's our guardian angel, comes up with a grid of coverage, and she sends that out to the fellows. And it's an outline, organization of different subjects in that particular area and different issues. And each of us goes through, prioritizes it, makes some kind of input as to what we think should be in there and how important it is. And then we rearrange that particular grid. And it's not necessarily, we're not dictating how the course should be taught, but these are the issues that we thought were important. And it's a dynamic situation. We make changes. We've made changes up to almost the very end of the trademark fellowship.
And I'll just add a couple of things. I've always taught at relatively small law schools that don't have a lot of other people who are specialists in my field. So if I get feedback from my fellows on the authoring team, or feedback from the reviewers who perhaps know a little something about my subject matter, it's very nice to have that interaction with somebody else who knows my field, because I don't often get that at my home institution. Plus, the experience of getting critiques from the Cali reviewers is very useful, because after a certain point in your career, you don't get critiqued very often. And so it's kind of nice to have that little check to know that somebody else is giving me some feedback and helping me to do a little bit better, because I don't get that experience very often anymore. And it's also instructive when you get a review from somebody and it's a well-done review, you know, where they're gentle with their criticism, but they're specific and they're constructive, and they also, you know, give you praise when you've done something well. It's a reminder to me to use those techniques when I am critiquing students or junior colleagues. So it's kind of a good refresher on how to give a good review, because I can tell when I've gotten a good review, and I can tell when the review I've gotten isn't quite so good. So it's a reminder to me to brush up on my own feedback techniques for the people that I supervise. Plus, Robert was talking about the grid of topics, where we figure out what topic is going to be covered and what we think is important, what we think is less important. When you're selecting a topic to do a Cali lesson, you can select a topic that's something you're really familiar with and you're just really gung-ho about and excited about, and you can deepen your perspective on that topic, find new ways to present that information, particularly if it's a sophisticated topic that you're an expert on but nobody else is. You need to find a way that you can convey that material to a non-expert in a way that can be absorbed by somebody who's a non-expert. And so it's a good refresher on how to take your expertise and find a way to translate that for somebody who's hearing this content for the first time. Alternatively, you can select a Cali topic for a lesson that is something you don't know very much about. One of those topics that you always kind of skip over in your class. And here's your opportunity to really learn it well, because you're going to learn it very, very well in order to do a Cali lesson on that. So my experience has been that I've picked some topics I know a lot about and some that I don't know very much about, and I get something out of each choice.
Yeah, actually that sort of leads into the second thing that I thought I got out of authoring Cali lessons was an increased understanding of what it is you're teaching. We all have gaps in our knowledge. We'd never admit this to our students. But, there are areas of our courses that we teach that we don't teach that particular area or don't teach it very much. We don't do any research in that particular area. And so it's just not something we focus on. And, really don't need to focus on it for purposes of anything we're doing. And given that we all have limited amounts of time, we're not going to spend much time focusing on it. If you're authoring a lesson, one of the things you have to do is basically fill in those gaps. As part of the coverage issue, and if you decide to cover something that you don't normally cover, you have to look at all those little areas that you don't usually teach, like the one Robert was talking about that the person brought up. Find out about that area. See if it's worth teaching, or worth putting in the lesson. If it is worth putting in the lesson, then you've got to get up to speed on it. And so one of the things that Cali lessons do is to help you fill in those gaps. And as an example, I went and I took this is a table of contents from a Cali lesson that I put together on the appraisal rights of corporate shareholders. If you don't know anything about corporations, you don't need to know what the appraisal rights of corporate shareholders are for purposes of this. But I teach a 4-credit business associations course, and depending on the book I use, occasionally I'll get into appraisal rights. But I also teach a 3-hour mergers and acquisitions course, and we talk about appraisal rights quite a bit in that course. And so this is really a subject that I spend a great deal of time, not a great deal of time, but a bit of time on in that mergers and acquisitions course. This is not something I'm unfamiliar with. And so what I did is I took that lesson and I went through and I highlighted all of the areas that I don't cover. And so even on an area like this where I'm pretty familiar with the topic, as you can see, I'm looking into a lot of things that I don't usually look at. Now this is essentially a statutory, for the most part, a statutory lesson. And so what that means is I'm analyzing and looking at the comments to the statute, looking at case law into the statute for things that I don't usually look at. And as a result of doing this lesson, I know some things about appraisal that I didn't know before, and have brought that into the classroom in a couple of cases of a couple of things up there. And so it's writing lessons is useful, even extending your knowledge, even with respect to things that you even know a lot about already.
Yeah, I'll add one thing. In the course of working on Cali lessons with the trademark team that I worked with this year, Not only did I learn more about some unfamiliar topics, but a topic that I've been teaching for many years had a recent development that I discovered as I was working on the lesson. And that discovery and my attempt to wrestle with the ramifications for the analysis I was trying to convey in the Cali lesson actually led to an idea for an article, which I've since written and which will be published soon. So actually I found that a Cali lesson could actually contribute to my scholarly undertaking.
One of the things that I found, I think others found in the team, is I was surprised at the dearth of case law on certain basic points that we needed to deal with. As a practitioner, you probably often came upon an argument that you needed to make. It was pretty clear what the law was, but to find authority for it was somewhat difficult. And so there were areas where trying to find a case that either could be an example or that you could cite as authority, sometimes it became difficult, and so it's worth the exercise. One point I wanted to make, or an example, is with the trademark team, we would meet periodically. Either have conference calls or meet in person, and then we would present our draft of our lesson, and then it would be critiqued by people in the room, and folks would ask questions about it. So Mary was dealing with a concept of trademark law, which is the merely deceptively misdescriptive mark. And when I deal with it in class, I get grunts from the students, and I say, don't blame me. I didn't write the statute. I didn't use that phraseology. Let's move on. I'll talk about what it means to be misdescriptive and deceptive. Mary began her presentation and was going through an analysis of it, and the rest of us were constantly interrupting her, saying, well, no, aren't you going to talk about this? Aren't you going to? And she'd just say, wait, those questions are coming up. And what she had done is she'd started with the real basics that the courts didn't deal with, that most of us in the room didn't deal with in class. But she started from square one and walked the student through it. And once we understood what she was doing, we just thought it was great, because she was dealing with certain issues that we just kind of took for granted. But for this kind of a lesson, you really needed to go through that. And one other point to make is that you may find that there's a particular subject area or issue that you basically deal with one line in the classroom. It may end up being a series of questions that you need to work through in a lesson, and so it really changes your view of what's going on in your classroom.
Yeah, I add to that. One of the reasons, particularly at the first here, is why some of these things don't show up in my classes. To me, a couple of those pages seem painfully obvious. Now, we all know nothing is painfully obvious to students when it comes to statutes or anything else for that matter. And one of the things I did when I noticed this is say, oh yeah, I could just mention that in class, and maybe that mention alone, you've got to read this, and this is, would get them to understand it a little bit better. And the exams don't indicate that was the case, but at least it indicated I'm trying harder. So anyway, understanding. The third thing I want to mention is course organization. Once you've decided on what topics you're going to cover, and once you know what you're going to do about those various topics, you've got to put it together. You've got to organize it just like you would in teaching. You've got to come up with a sequence. You have to decide what kind of background knowledge students might need for each topic. In other words, what things are there that you're not going to talk about in the lesson, or that you're not going to talk about in class, that students would need to know about this subject? I run into this problem a lot teaching corporations. You mentioned stock, and about a tenth of the class, less than it used to be, but a tenth of the class, their eyes just kind of glaze over and stock. In Nebraska, a lot of them are probably thinking cows. But so what kind of things do they need as part of the lesson of the class that they may not be coming into the class with, that you're not really going to talk about in the lesson? And then, to the extent you have related topics that you're not talking about simultaneously. How do you integrate those things? I know we all in teaching run into that problem. I'm going to talk about topic X today. I'm going to talk about topic Y on Wednesday. But they really relate to each other. When I get to Y, how do I go back and relate it to X? You got to do all of that organization for Cali lessons, and doing that obviously feeds back into what you're doing in the same topics for classroom teaching. Basically the same kinds of things I was talking about with respect to course coverage. You're doing a Cali lesson, it forces you to reevaluate whatever organization you might be doing in class. And I know I have redone my class notes in a number of cases because I came up with an organization for the Cali lesson that I thought made more sense. And the thing about Cali lessons is the sequence is very obvious in a Cali lesson. Right? You can see page 1 goes to page 2, which goes to page 2A or whatever. And so you're doing that organization in a systematic way, whereas in class, you're spreading it out over a period of time. You've got a lot of other concerns as you're trying to teach class other than whether the sequence is working. And so you can focus on it much better, I think, in the context of a Cali lesson. And then again, you get feedback from the reviewers. You've got people who may put it together different ways and telling you why they're putting it together in different ways, and it might make sense. A couple of things that I changed actually related less to doing the lesson than to some of the feedback I got as to how students would approach it and why they would need one thing before another, even though that might not be the way I would structure it, just in coming to the statute or coming to the case or whatever. So that feedback, again, means you're not just limited to your own ideas. And as with Mary, I work at a relatively small school, which really, there's someone else who teaches a corporations course, but I essentially am the corporations and securities person. The closest we get beyond that is some of the tax people, and I don't talk their language. So it gives you an opportunity to get some feedback from people that you might not have at the local level. So, organization. Anything you want to add?
One thing that you need to determine before you even start writing the lesson is what you intend the lesson to do, what level it should be. Is it intended to be a review of something you suspect the student has dealt with in class already, or is it a situation where it's basic instruction, it is to take the place of a particular topic, maybe an esoteric topic that you're interested in, but you understand that most people don't get to it in a course, but students may want to learn more about it, or it may be that you want it to be at a higher level of analysis, a more sophisticated take on a particular subject. And so, to a certain extent, the organization, but definitely the content of your lesson is going to be dictated to a great extent on what purpose your lesson is to serve.
I teach a lot of very statutory courses, and writing Cali lessons on a statutory topic helps me think about what statutes the students really need to be reading for us to have a productive classroom session on a particular topic. And we all know that when you assign students to read statutes, it's as though you're speaking a foreign language. And somehow they completely block out the fact that they were supposed to read a statute before they came to class, and you ask them questions about the statute during class, and where's the statute book? It's on the floor next to them because the computer's in front of them and the casebook's in front of them, and there was just no room for that statute book, and hey, it's only statutes. In writing the Cali lesson, I can't realistically reproduce the entire statute. When you're dealing with a long, complicated statute, I can't create a pop-up that has the entire statute in it and really expect the student to look at that pop-up and answer a question, because their eyes are just going to really glaze over when they're faced with this huge block of text on the computer. And so one of the things that I have to do is decide how much of the statute I want to feed them at a particular time in order to get them to focus on a particular issue. I may choose at one point to give them a pop-up that has only just a small portion of the statute, because I really want them to focus on that particular language. At other times, when I want them to go searching through the statute and have that experience of having to look for the relevant passage, I'll reproduce a larger chunk of the statute instead of, pointing them toward the exact correct subsection, because I have to have that experience of looking through the statute to find the right stuff. And so I find that has been useful as a way to construct the Cali lesson, and I need to figure out now how I want to put that into the classroom experience, whether there's some way that, prior to a particular class, I can ask them to focus on a very particular portion of the statute for one class, and then on another day let them know that they need to review that entire statute because they're going to be hunting and pecking their way through the statute during class. So it's just made me more conscious of the value of focusing them sometimes on a very small part of the statute, but other times making them do the search through the entire statute. And I have yet to see exactly how that's going to play out in the classroom, but I think it will be useful.
One thing on the review process, one admonition that we received early on from Deb Quintal was when we review another fellow's work, the lesson that's in draft form, is we're not to rewrite the lesson. We're not supposed to be treating it as though it's our lesson and this is the way it should be done, but basically take the structure, take the focus that the person has decided to go with, and then try and refine it, try to tweak it here and there, or give suggestions as to how it would, how students would better interact with it.
Well, the topics that I've talked about so far basically are dealing with the substantive gains you've got in terms of course coverage, in terms of understanding of the topic, in terms of how you organize the topic. The next thing I want to talk about is technique. Because I think that authoring Cali lessons improves your teaching technique. Now, you wouldn't think, if you thought about it, that doing a computer lesson and using computer software would tell you very much about teaching technique, about how to do live teaching. But I really think it does. And this was probably the I don't know if it was the greatest benefit. It was certainly the most unexpected benefit to me of writing Cali lessons. At first, I didn't recognize it. It took a while before I realized what was going on. And I think that the key for me was to, at some point I realized that anything I was doing in class, in terms of what sort of technique I was using, there was an equivalent in the Cali author software. That basically the way I was putting these Cali lessons together is essentially the way I was putting my class together. And not just in terms of substance, but in terms of the technique of what I was doing. So all of the choices that you've got to make with respect to classroom teaching, in terms of how you teach something, also come up in writing Cali lessons. And I was thinking about how to convey that, and really the only thing I could come up with was to take you through some things and actually show you that. And I will apologize in advance. Some of these slides are kind of hokey. I was in kind of a goofy mood as I was putting this together, as you'll see. But ignore my substance of what's in the slides and focus on the points that I'm talking about. One of the things, obviously, that we do in class because of time constraints or because it's the most effective way to convey certain things is to lecture. And obviously, it shouldn't be any surprise to anybody that you can do that by computer. Cali has a book page, as it's called, that essentially allows you to lecture. Just nothing but text on it. The student reads the text and then moves on. So you can do a lecture in the Cali format. Another thing, and I mentioned this earlier, one of the things Like I said, I was in a strange mood. You think that's bad? I've actually cited this in a law review article. But you want to test their background knowledge, right? You want to make sure before you start something that the student knows what they need to know. I mean, that they have some idea what the New York Stock Exchange is, for instance, or what a share of stock is before you start talking about the rights of shareholders. And there are a lot of ways you could do that in Cali. One would be to simply give them a book page like we looked at before, which just goes through all that. But not everybody needs that information. And so what you can typically do in Cali is you can give them a pop-up that has that information. You can do a hyperlink so that if they need that information, they can go to it, but nobody else has to suffer through it. So they come to the hyperlink, they click on the hyperlink, they get what they want. I'm going to leave that one up as little as possible. I can't even stand to read it. But they get what they want, and if they don't need it, they just go on. Now they've got the background, they can close the pop-up, they can go on to whatever you're doing in the lesson. So, in fact, Cali can do it. Yeah, Cali can do it better because you can. Cali can do it better because you can individualize it. In class, everybody has to suffer through that background, even though if they don't need it. In Cali, they only have to deal with it if they need it. Another thing we do in class is to ask very simple yes, no, either or yet answers. You know, yes or no, A or B. I mean, that's all they have to give us. Often we do that with students who are having problems, and you figure, give them a yes, no, at least they've got a 50% chance. Cali allows you to do that. Very simple. Very simple, multiple choice kinds of questions. You know, and it doesn't have to be yes, no. If you have something else you want to put in there, you can change the yes, no. I think yes, no is the default, but you can put anything else in there that you want. So you can do those kinds of questions. Sometimes in class, you're asking the students to quantify something, to put something on a scale. You know, on a range from A to B, where would you put this hypothetical? I mean, is it very likely to be whatever, or very unlikely? And Cali allows you to do that. Not many people use this page, actually. I think it's underused. It's what's known as a slider. I don't use it a lot because I don't ask those kinds of questions a lot. But what they do is it allows them, they go into the little pointer and they set it wherever they want to set it. And so you can kind of, obviously a lot of questions in law aren't yes, no. It's more likely, less likely. And so they can kind of do it on their own and then look at the response that you've got to see how well their guess at things measured up to what you think the likelihood is. So you can do that in a Cali lesson. Another thing that you do is ask them to categorize questions. You know, here I'm going to give you 4 possible categories. Where would you put this? And Cali allows you to do that. Right? There are actually several ways you can do category kinds of questions in Cali. This is just one of them. But give them different items and ask them to put them into categories. Where, you know, what legal doctrine would this fit in, or whatever. And something like this, you can do that as well. A lot of times, and this is not something I do much either. Certainly not that question. But a lot of people like broad, open-ended questions, where you're expecting a rather lengthy response from the student, and then you play off of that. And I tend to prefer shorter questions. But you can do this in Cali as well. You give them a broad question. They have space where they can type in as much as they want. I'm sure there's some limit in the software, but I don't know how. I've never done a sample answer that's run into it. And then after they type in their response, they get to look at whatever you've put in to see how close they were to what they needed to be writing. And so you force them to write. and you force them to be thinking about what needs to be included as opposed to a more simple question that's leading them towards what the issue actually is. So you can do that kind of essay sort of question in Cali Author. You might want to ask a question that calls for a very short answer. What's really embarrassing is several of these slides I've used in law review articles. I've used this one. Tells you the kind of law review articles I write. Sometimes you want a pretty short answer, and Cali allows you to do that. Basically, a word, a couple of words, a sentence, short sentence, something like that. They type their answer in, they grade, they get feedback on what the appropriate answer is, which I will not give to that question. And so you can do that kind of thing in Cali Author. Mary mentioned teaching statutory courses, and I teach statutory courses too. And a lot of times what you want them to do in statutory courses is, you've got this long statute, you want them to pick out the key part of the statute that applies to the particular case or hypothetical. What in this long statutory section is relevant here? And Cali allows you to do that. Basically, you can set up a page where you've got, say, your statute here on the right side, and ask them to select a word or a phrase or whatever that is the relevant word or phrase. It doesn't have to be one word. It can be several. If you're worried about them, going long by one word or not getting quite the entire phrase, you can account for that. You can allow them some latitude. But it basically forces them to go within the text that you're showing them and pick out what's relevant. And I think this is great for doing statutory kind of analysis. And in a way you really can't do in class, especially with everybody. One of the problems with teaching statutes in class is that the only person that's typically really learning anything about how to read statutes is the person you're asking the question, and everybody else is waiting to see what that person says so they can write it down. In a Cali lesson, you can force each one of them to do that kind of analysis. Now, all of us have our little things we like to draw up on the blackboard, or if you're like me now, put on PowerPoint slides. The little diagrams with all the arrows and charts and words and all over the place that end up, nobody at the end of class has the slightest idea of what's going on. Well, maybe in your class, but if you're like me, there's arrows all over the place. Cali Author allows you to do that. Basically, anything you can draw, any picture you can come up with, you can put it on Cali. This is an example of a diagram I use in a lesson on mergers and acquisitions, introducing one particular kind of acquisition type. And basically what I'm doing here is I'm taking them through a series of slides. You don't have to do it. You can put up a single image. But here there's a button missing down here, I think is on the next slide. They can go from one slide to the next, and then over on the left I'm telling them slide 1 is essentially the before, slide 2, yeah, there's the buttons there. Slide 2 is what happens, and then slide 3 is what things look like afterwards. And so any sort of diagram that you can put together, you can get on a Cali lesson. If you like to use pictures for whatever reason, I know probably trademark or something like that, picture of whatever you're talking about might come in handy, or copyright. You can put that up there as well. And if you're having trouble doing it, I found that people at Cali are really helpful at letting you do that. This, I think, was done in just Microsoft Paint, which is the little drawing thing that comes with your Windows-based computer anyway. Apple has an equivalent. I'm not sure what it's called. I've completely sold out to Mr. Gates myself. And I want that known in case he has any money left. But so you can, any sort of diagram or flow chart you want to put up, you can put up on Cali Author. And you can get a much better quality than this. The quality of this is partially converting it to a slide. It's partially because I did it in Paint as opposed to I'm now using Photoshop. You get much better, much higher quality text in your diagrams. But you can do that kind of thing. Now, in the classroom, Nobody that's not a Monty Python fan is going to get that one. But in the classroom, of course, you're not doing questions by themselves. You're putting it all in context. You've got a whole series of things going on. And a lot of times you may want to ask a series of relatively simple questions. I know in class a lot of times when I have a student that just doesn't get it, I will just break it down, like, do you understand the word "the"? No, not really. In that sort of context. In Cali, there's a lot of ways you can do this in Cali, but Cali has a page that basically allows you to run through a series of questions and give the student feedback as they answer each question, as they go down the list. So as you see here, the students on the second question got the first one wrong, got some feedback, goes to the second question, answers it, gets a pop-up that provides feedback, and you can kind of lead into the next question. This doesn't do that very much. And just kind of go down and sort of lead the student through the answer with a series of questions like that, just like you might do in a class. So a very simple way of doing that. Now, in class, you don't always do it that way. One of the things that happens in the classroom is that what you do depends on the student's response. If the student's answer is wrong, you might back up a little bit, maybe lecture some more, maybe give a short mini lecture on something, and then go with the students again. Or, as I was saying, you might ask simpler questions. If the student's right, you might ask questions designed to make sure that the student's right for the right reason, which it took me some experience teaching, but the assumption that they're getting there the same way you got there is often incorrect. And so the fact that they said yes doesn't necessarily mean that they understand what you're talking about. But so you can ask questions designed to get out from the student. What made you give that answer, even though it's the right one? Or challenge them as to whether it is the right one. Nothing drives me crazier in class than you'll ask a student a question and they'll say, so the answer is A. Are you sure? B. And this allows you to take advantage of that, just like you would in class. A student says, well, I think the answer is A. Well, what about this fact? Are you sure it's A? And so you can even the student that gets the right answer, you can kind of play around the things they might not have thought of and force them to understand why the other answers are wrong. And basically what Cali allows you to do is send people with different answers different places, what they call branching. And it's hard to show without actually going through a Cali lesson, but what I did was I took a, this is a flow chart you can get in Cali Author if you haven't used it for the lesson you're using. And I took, this is just a piece of one of my lessons to kind of illustrate. And you'll notice that say up there at the question interest 2, which is a question page, they've got a choice between A and B. If they choose A, they go to one way, interest 2A. If they choose B, which I believe is the wrong answer, they go to interest 2B. They get some feedback there. Then the wrong people get to go back to the other question. We get down to interest 4. There's 3 answers, and where they end up going depends on which of the 3 they choose. Because I have no idea what question interest 4 is, but if they get A, if they say A, I want to tell them something. If they say C, I want to test them with something else. And you'll notice that if they really mess up, I'm going to take them all the way back up here to interest 2 again. Because I think if they're choosing whatever answer D is here, or C, whatever answer C is here, I want them to go through this again. They're just not getting it. Whereas if they choose other answers, I'm just going to feed them back somewhere else, forward. I'm forcing them to do the question over if they're getting me right here. And so you can do anything like that in Cali that you would do in class. And so basically, everything or just about everything you would do in class, you can do in Cali Author. And so when you're putting these lessons together in Cali Author, you're essentially helping yourself discover what's going to work best in class in terms of sequencing, in terms of how you respond, things like that. And so, like I said, I was very surprised that this happened, but I really think that working with these different question types and discovering when they worked best, when they didn't work, what kind of things they didn't work with, was very good in terms of helping me with my teaching technique.
Just one very modest addition. A benefit to me, I think, is going to be that I can, when I offer a Cali lesson on a topic that I enjoy teaching in class, I get an opportunity to take advantage of the skills of Cali's graphic artist, Ron, who is extremely talented. And for those of us who have zero artistic talent, it's awfully nice to be able to describe your artistic vision to someone, either in words or in a little stick figure sketch, and have them turn it into something that actually looks pretty good, which then can be used in the Cali lesson, but you could also then extract that picture if you want to use it in your classroom presentation. And now you have a wonderful picture that you could not possibly have created yourself, and it will enhance your overall classroom presentation on that topic.
Dealing with the branching and verification, Mary turned out to be the queen of verification in our group, and is ferocious with requiring a student to defend her answer, which all of us do in the classroom, but she has particular knack or quirk when the answer was correct. I mean, the notion of trust but verify is not in her being. And so the student will give the correct answer, and then it's, oh, you think you're so smart? Well, what about this one? And she would go through 3 or 4 levels. And so the students really have to work hard to finally be let loose and go on to the next part of the lesson. When we started, what I was told, and I think all of us were told, is that what Cali was looking for with a Cali lesson, particularly with the fellowships where the people that are in the fellowship are fairly seasoned as teachers, is that we all have particular portions of our course presentation that we know works well. It's basically the greatest hits kind of thing. You know that when you're dealing with this topic and you've dealt with it for 5 years and the students get it and the class just moves along, those are the things that they like to see in the lesson. They want to bring that experience into the lesson. And so one of the ways that you can do that, particularly if you tend to use the board and put all kinds of graphs and circles and arrows and things on the board, is you can give them that information, and the graphics folks just do a terrific job. So you can fax them, you can do it yourself on a program and send that to them. Or you can give them a verbal description and they try and figure out what you have in mind. In my case, I decided, well, I'm in this fellowship and I need to give them images, so it gave me the excuse to go out and buy a digital camera. And so, and in the trademark fellowship, I started with photographing a grape nuts box and sent that to them and said, well, we can't use grape nuts because there's a trademark problem and I'm not dealing with that particular title of the product. Make this brown and crunchy. And so they just took out the offending language and put it in, and it looks like something you could buy at a supermarket. Or I took a digital photo of a public domain Remington sculpture that I have at home, and that became a record album. So they do a very, very nice job. In terms of how this can impact what you do in the classroom, this past spring, in addition to teaching at Southwestern, I was subbing for someone at Loyola teaching copyright. And knowing I was going to work in the copyright area with Cali, at Loyola they have digital whiteboards. And so I would come into class either with a prearranged kind of drawing that I would, before class, put up on the board, or kept it in mind that as I was going through the class and writing these things on the board. And the nice thing about the digital whiteboard is you can save it to disk. And so as I'm teaching the course and putting things on the board, every class session I'd save that disk knowing that several of those graphics are going to be going to Cali and that they're going to be using them, and so this way I don't have to recreate it or try to explain it.
I should point out for people that find this complicated, you do not have to use this in Cali to create pages or to create links or anything. I ignore it. I simply took a picture of it to kind of illustrate. So if you don't want to deal with diagrams like that, you don't have to create a Cali lesson. But I talked a little bit about one thing, and that is the question of dealing with student errors. And I really would treat that as a separate benefit of offering lessons. One of the hardest things for me after almost 20 years of teaching now, I started when I was 5, is anticipating student errors. Just when I think I've got it down, a student will come up with something I've never heard before, and I'll have to figure out how to react to that. Because I think one of the key elements of good teaching is how you react to the students and the different kinds of mistakes they make. And in writing a Cali lesson, you have to think about wrong answers in a really systematic way. For a lot of these questions, you have to come up with wrong answers. And you don't want just any wrong answers. You want the wrong answers that students are likely to come up with. You want the answers that are likely to mislead them into choosing wrong. Or at least for some of your questions, you want to do it that way. And so you've got to kind of try to anticipate student mistakes. And then you've got to plan how are you going to respond to those mistakes. As I said, you can respond differently depending on the student answer, not only within a question, but in terms of where that student goes next. And so you've got to think about, well, if this student gets the statute wrong in this way, what is the student focusing on that I need to deal with? And you do that in the context of preparing a Cali lesson, and you do it in a much more systematic way than you do, I think, in class, because you've got to have it all planned out. You've got to think about it in advance, and to the extent you've thought about these things in advance and you know how to deal with certain mistakes, when it comes up in class, you're ready for it. I mean, nobody can ever get us ready for the off-the-wall student that just can't agree that red is red or whatever, but you're ready. You know what sort of technique you're going to use. You know how you're going to respond in terms of, do I give the student a lecture? Do I ask other questions? Whatever, in response to student errors. And you know the kinds of student errors that you're likely to come up with. And the review process is really helpful on this, because what I found in the fellowship was a lot of other people who taught the same courses, and they say, well, have you ever had this answer? And, well, why would a student come to that answer? And they lay it out, And so you're kind of, it's sort of the worst of my teaching experience. Everybody's sharing. Hey, what about this one? Have you ever heard that before? How could a student possibly interpret the statute that way? What do I do if they do? And so you're doing all this over and over and over again as you do the lesson. And it really does have good feedback in terms of your classroom teaching, I think.
Well, one thing I found is that Deb Quintal is a walking encyclopedia of student errors. Basically, because she's
her own or somebody else's?
Deb never makes any errors. That's why she's our guardian angel. But she's the point person with the Cali lessons, and so when students have a complaint or they've made a mistake, she's the one that they tend to contact by email, and so she's basically heard everything.
This is a little bit beyond this topic, but in dealing with student errors, of course, sometimes we discover that the student has made an error because of an ambiguity in the way we phrase the question. And all of us get particularly worried about that at exam time when we're trying to write a really good exam. One thing that I discovered from having to wrestle with drafting really good Cali questions for Cali lessons was, identifying possible sources of ambiguity, unintended ambiguity, obviously, where perhaps I've phrased the question in a way that could unintentionally mislead a student as to what I was looking for. So my consciousness about that got heightened, I think, by drafting questions for Cali lessons, and that has carried into the drafting of my exams. And this particular semester, I had used some of my old exam questions as ideas for Cali lessons, so I had pretty much given away those questions by turning them into Cali lessons, and so I had to write a completely new exam, which I don't often do. I like to reuse and tinker with questions. So I was a little nervous. I was writing a completely new exam, 20 new multiple choice questions, a whole new essay question. And so that was a lot of questions to scrutinize and proofread and think about whether I had phrased them correctly. But the exam worked really well, and it was free of ambiguities. It was probably the first time I've written that many new questions that had no ambiguities in them. And what really shocked me was the day after I gave the exam, one of the students in the class, who was apparently still speaking to me, came up to me and said, "That was such a well-written exam." Said, "I've been in law school 3 years, and that is the best written exam I've ever taken." And that's not the comment I usually expect to hear, on an exam. If they are still speaking to me, it'll be something like, "It was fair," or, that fact scenario was very clever, or something like that. But to actually have a student use the words "well written" in connection with an exam was kind of stunning, and I really do attribute that very, very much to my experience of writing Cali lessons. I'm sure that was the reason that I was able to write an exam that was concise and unambiguous. So it really helped me a great deal there.
This past spring, I had two benefits from doing the Cali lessons. One is both are similar to what Mary was talking about. One is I had a long question or fact pattern for one of my lessons, and I needed an essay question for my trademark class this spring. And since the Cali lesson at that point was unpublished, there was my essay exam, so I didn't have to come up with anything new for the class. And I taught entertainment law for the first time this spring. And in my courses, I give 50% essay, 50% multiple choice. And so I had 50 questions that I had to come up with for multiple choice. And, of course, my plan was throughout the semester I would be writing one a class or something like that, and you know how that goes. Because I was in the Cali question writing mode, I basically sat down and plowed through, got 50 multiple choice questions. I don't know if there are any that were unintentionally ambiguous, but I didn't get any complaints. So just getting used to coming out and drafting these questions helps you just in terms of quantity, if nothing else.
One final thought from me, and then I'll turn it over to Robert and Mary if they have anything else to say. We've talked about why to author a Cali lesson. I just want to really, really quickly deal with the how. That's not the purpose of this, but if you are interested in authoring a lesson, there's some places you can look. The Cali contact, Deb Quintal, we've talked about her a lot, and that's because she's helped all of us a lot. Deb, would you stand up for people that don't know you? I doubt there's anybody that doesn't know you. Deb's job is to deal with authors and potential authors. Extremely helpful if you're thinking about authoring a lesson. And the fact that we were on fellowships, you don't have to be in a fellowship to author a lesson. I've reviewed several lessons by people that just came up to Deb and said, "I want to author a lesson on a certain topic." So contact Deb if you're interested. Her email and contact information is at the Cali website. The Cali website itself has a lot of helpful information about authoring lessons. A lot of sample pages, a lot of how-to kinds of issues. And then finally, if you're like me and you just like to get it, you discovered you can't break a computer by playing around with software, if you just like to play with the software, open Cali Author and play with the software. And you've seen the various question types. You can look at the website to see them. And if you like to do it that way, just do it that way and use Deb or the website as a backdrop to that. And if anybody wants has any questions or wants to contact me about any of this, I put my phone number and email address up there. I have a habit of not answering my phone, so you're much more likely to get me at the email address. So I'd be perfectly happy to talk with you if you want to talk to somebody that's gone through it. It's, like I said, I just started authoring 2 years ago, so it's recent enough that I can remember what it was like. I can remember being frustrated from time to time, not knowing how to do stuff with the software. You asked Deb, I almost quit the fellowship right at the first of the fellowship because the software erased one of my lessons somehow that we never have figured out how it happened. But so if you're interested in authoring, there's some places you could look. Any final comments?
One final comment for those of you who might have the misfortune of becoming associate deans at some point. You should definitely have the experience of working with Deb Quintal because she is the best cat herder on the planet.